like a theoretical, non-existent politician who would do a good job.
Right, but this is like.
But here they're actually comparing to the dude that just left that we know did a terrible job. And people are like, on second thought, I might go with that dude. That's really, really bad. It's a really bad sign. And as you point out, all of these polls, even the best among them, overstated Biden's support going into the election. So however bad it looks for Biden in these polls, it's likely a little bit worse than what the pollsters are able to gather, just because they've been really unable to capture accurately the breadth of Republican sentiment and favorability in the country over the past number of years. There was one last piece here that I thought was kind of interesting that shows it's not just, obviously Republicans are opposed to Biden, they're kind of locked in. Independents, dramatic shift away from Biden, but you also see some real apathy among the Democratic base.
Yes.
And I thought that this quote that Sam Stein captured from a voter was pretty telling. Now, this is about the idea that within the reconciliation bill, which we're about to tell you a little bit more about, that they're thinking of cutting the child tax credit, means testing it, only expanding it for a year. And what this guy, Jake Wright, who's 40 years old, said, he says, I've been a Democrat my entire adult life, but letting a program expire or means testing it so that people who would generally benefit from it will lose out on much needed help infuriates me. It makes me wonder why I bother supporting these people. So again, as we think about moving into the midterms, as we think about what the future of power is going to look like here in Washington, D.C., one of the things that we've told you consistently is it really, really matters who's energized. Not just, what's the overall approval rating and how do people feel about the country. Those numbers are already bad for Biden. But who's actually energized? And when you have a sentiment like this, where voters who are lifelong Democrats are like, why do I bother with these people? Like, you've literally been promising me the prescription drug reform thing since 2006. You've had complete control of Washington several times during that period, and you still haven't gotten it done. Like, what are we doing here? Why am I bothering? That also is going to be a massive drag on them. Some analysts are saying, I'm not sure I buy this analysis, but it's kind of interesting that the Virginia race that's coming up, the gubernatorial election that we're going to talk to Kyle Kondik about today, turns on Democrats being able to get something done in Washington to kind of fire up their side and get them to ultimately turn out. I'm not sure that I really believe that. I think it's much more about who's able to scare their base more. Does Terry McAuliffe's pitch that Glenn Youngkin is basically electing Trump
with the mask on.
Right, or is Youngkin's pitch that Terry McAuliffe is some race warrior who's gonna force your kids to be segregated or whatever he's saying? Is that the thing that ultimately wins the day? I think it ultimately turns more on that. But overall, Democrats cannot continue to promise a bunch of things that they have no intention on ever delivering and then be surprised when people don't show up for them.
So that's the key point. You've got huge apathy amongst the Democratic base, no real reason to try and come out. I mean, look, it's 2010 all over again. It's the exact same thing. Obama comes in, there's a big economic crisis, they pass some middling stimulus package, that's the only thing. Then they do this horrific monster of whatever Obamacare actually turned out to be. Nobody really knew what it was. All the Republicans have to do is promise, I'm not Obama. Massive swing in support. Dems were like, this doesn't seem that great. My wages continue to go down. I still lost my job. The economy is still in mild recession. I did get a new job, but it pays me half of what it used to. Oh, and all the factories are shipping overseas. And what happens? The 2010 red wave. I mean, we're basically in this exact same scenario. And it just seems very difficult now for Biden to try and drag himself out of the hole. That being said, maybe Trump is stupid enough in order to maybe Trump is still so powerful of a motivator to Democrats that it'll be enough. It's very possible, that you can avoid some massive void. The real test is going to be the the test here in Virginia, because we are going to see. Terry McAuliffe has said nothing else but Glenn Youngkin is Trump. if he wins, that's a very powerful validator for the Trump strategy for Democrats. It could be enough in many of these independent places. Personally, I'm banking that it's not necessarily in Virginia, but overall on the national level. But who knows how many points it does count for whenever Trump is off the ballot, but still a boogeyman to a lot of Democrats.
Joe Biden won Virginia by 10 points.
Yeah. This shouldn't
It's a
even be
blue
question.
state.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Democrats control everything. They have both Senate seats, governor's mansion, House of Delegates, state Senate. It should not be coming down to the wire at all. And yet, here we are.
Yeah.
And I think even if Terry McAuliffe is ultimately able to hang on and edge out Glenn Youngkin, it's a very bad sign, ultimately, for where Democrats stand across the country. Let's talk about one of the things that is contributing to their woes here, which is that reconciliation bill, the Build Back Better plan. I know I say it every time, but I really wish they'd come up with a better name because it's so terrible. Okay, so here's the very latest. Let's throw this tweet up on the screen that we have. So last week, there was a bunch of commentary and visuals that came out. There was this meeting between Joe Manchin and Bernie Sanders. Well, now we're getting some of the behind the scenes details of what went on in that meeting. This is Elena Treen. She said, with Axios, she says, scoop, Joe Manchin and Bernie Sanders squabbled behind closed doors Wednesday, with Manchin using a raised fist goose egg to tell his colleagues he can live without any of President Biden's social spending plan. If you click through to that piece, they talk to another witness who was there, Senator Chris Coons, very close ally of Joe Biden, who said, quote, there was a vigorous 10-minute discussion. Bernie said $6 trillion. Manchin said we shouldn't do it at all. Coons recalled himself making that goose egg symbol as he recounted the conversation. He said Manchin indicated it will contribute to inflation. We've already passed the American Rescue Plan. We should just pass the infrastructure bill and, pause for 6 months. So even though there were a lot of sort of amicable noises that came out of this meeting, the reality is that behind closed doors, they were incredibly far apart. And I think, I don't know that Manchin is bluffing here. I mean, yes, he and Sinema and some of the other bad actors in the Democratic Party, they do want the infrastructure bill to pass. It is something that their corporate donors would like to see. But I'm just not sure that it's as much of a deal breaker for them to not get that infrastructure bill as progressives were ultimately hoping. I don't think Manchin is totally bluffing here that he'd be comfortable with, at the end of the day,
I agree,
nothing getting through. So that's kind of where the impasse is. There's some more details coming out on the tax front. And this is interesting. So Kyrsten Sinema said she didn't want to lift the marginal tax rate on high-income individuals or on corporations. So it was kind of back to the drawing board for Democrats. What's a twist in the story is that those rates are a little bit irrelevant, especially for super high wealth individuals. So we covered last week that Cliff Asness piece talking about the working rich. Now listen, I'm not going to cry any tears for people who are making $500,000 a year and see their taxes go up. I'm perfectly fine with that. But it is true that up to this point, the tax plan that was offered from Biden really didn't hit billionaires or super high wealth individuals at all. It did not go after any of their pet loopholes that they use to avoid taxes over their entire lives. So now, with Sinema ruling out the marginal rate increases, they're actually thinking of doing a form of a billionaire tax. I'll give you a little bit of the details of that in a minute, but here's what Speaker Pelosi had to say to Jake Tapper on that topic.
Senator Sinema, who was a key Arizona Democrat vote in the Senate, Senator Sinema has said she will not support raising the corporate tax rate, raising the tax on high wage earners. And President Biden has acknowledged that might mean you can't pay for the rest of the bill using those sources of revenue. Do you have an alternate way?
Yeah, we do, because we were ready to pay for 3.5.
Right.
So we certainly can pay for half of that.
And what is that alternate way? Is it a billionaire's tax? Is it a minimum tax for corporations?
Is, shall we say, has an appeal, but it doesn't produce that much money.
Okay.
Because the bill is not written yet, we hope it will be written today and introduced tomorrow. Only then can the Joint Tax Committee evaluate what it brings in. We anticipate $250 billion, but we need closer to $2 trillion.
So
we have other things.
Such as?
Well, such as we have enforcement, and that's several $100 billion. We have the overseas harmonization of taxes, and that's a few $100 billion. We have an array. And I'm not going to say what they are right here.
So they've also talked about this sort of global minimum tax for corporations.
A minimum tax that corporations have to pay regardless of all the exemptions, which
Right.
frankly would be better than the current corporate tax rate.
Correct.
Yeah.
And that would be better than even lifting the top marginal tax
Yes,
because
yeah.
none of the big corporations pay that anyway. It's a farce. The specific proposal under consideration and why, because she says like, well, ultimately it wouldn't raise that much revenue, which is a little bit of a head scratcher.
Right, you're like, wait a second. So almost all the wealth is held by the top 1%, but a tax on the top 1% isn't going
Would
to
it-
raise that much.
But the reason
So
why...
maybe the tax is wrong.
Right. Well, and the reason why is because when she says a billionaire tax, they literally mean it would only apply to billionaires,
Yes.
which is like 1,000 people. So the proposal under consideration comes from Ron Wyden. It would impose an annual tax on unrealized capital gains on liquid assets held by billionaires. I think that liquid assets part also probably is why it wouldn't ultimately raise that much money.
That's right.
But it's only supposed to affect people with $1 billion in assets or $100 million in income for 3 consecutive years. So it would only apply to about 1,000 people. And that liquid assets part, I have a feeling really limits what they're able to do with it too. Still, at least you're thinking about doing something that would impact the billionaire class.
I'm just trying to get my mind around how exactly you can tax. How are liquid assets already not being taxed, right? So like, what
Right.
type
What's
of
your
asset
definition
would it
of
be?
liquid? Because if it's cash, then you have
Wait,
realized
then you've
the
already have to
gain.
pay a tax, exactly. So
Right.
I'm just trying to figure out what a liquid asset, which is non-taxable, even looks like. But maybe that's why I'm not a billionaire. So there you go. I'm sure there is some sort of
sure there's some
tax
category.
shelter or something.
Yes.
But yeah, look, it clearly doesn't go far enough in terms of what it would actually look like. And even actually legally, it also does get sketchy in terms of taxing unrealized capital gains, in terms of stocks, equities, and more, because it's like, well, if you haven't realized it, does that mean then that they can write off all their losses? Which I think you can to a certain extent, but it can get very sketchy. As I understand it legally, whenever you're trying to do that, given fluctuations, really what it is that they're still not going after, Crystal, the carried interest loophole or the step-up basis. Those are the two most basic ones. Carried interest loophole alone is like $180 billion over 10 years. Easy. I've got your money, Nancy. It's right there.
Al
You
Sharpton
just
tells
don't want
me
to do it.
That's going to hurt black business owners
Exactly.
creating wealth.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, that's what Al Sharpton tells us. Step-up basis is untold hundreds of billions if you wanted to go after that one. Once again, they go after all of these convoluted schemes which are difficult to understand. I'm beginning to see people, online pushback of like, wait, they can go after, like my Bitcoin or whatever. It's like, no, you're not. Unless you're a Bitcoin billionaire, I think you're probably
You're going to be okay.
Yeah, it's like unless you made $100 million in assets for 3 consecutive years, or you're worth an entire $1 billion, you are not going to be affected by this. But regardless, they make it very difficult in order to understand how exactly it would work. How are people even supposed to know what that means? You're actually not even really going after the majority of the wealth whenever it comes to what's
Right.
actually happening here. And the easiest ways to do it, you've ruled out because you're corporate donors. Why are we playing all these kabuki theater games? Like, it's easy to figure out.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, did you mention that Manchin was in Delaware?
Oh,
right?
yeah,
So
that's
there
right.
was
That's
there
the
was a
other
great summit, a meeting of the minds. I would love to be on that wall. Schumer, Manchin, and Biden in Delaware over the weekend. But Chris, and I believe
They're
we had
not
a tear
sending
sheet
their
of that.
best, Sagar.
Yeah, they certainly are not. Let's put their tear sheet up there. So Joe Manchin was there, down there in Delaware. But in terms of a statement that came out afterwards, it was basically just word salad. They were like, they've met. There was some developments. And that's pretty much it, Manchin appears agreeable in terms of the leaks that were put out from there, on board with the White House proposal for that billionaire tax that you talked about, and certain corporations, I think certain being the key one, I'm sure Kohl's probably gonna get carved out there, to help pay for President Biden's new plan. But in general, nobody knows what's in this thing. Nobody knows whether it would affect them. The social spending ones, in terms of Manchin and the child tax credit and that, have not been resolved whatsoever. We are again repeating the Obamacare playbook. The truth is that there's no way anything is actually going to happen, in the next couple of weeks? I highly doubt that. In terms of the actual negotiations, then it's Thanksgiving, right? Everybody's gone for a week.
Yeah.
And then it's early December. Last time I checked, this town starts to go on holiday. The Christmas parties in D.C. start December 2nd, just so everybody knows.
Well, so let me tell you what they're saying.
Okay.
I wouldn't put a lot of stock in this, but I'll just tell you what they're saying. They want to come up with a top line number this week, Thursday.
Okay.
And they've sort of invented this deadline for themselves of like the highway transportation funding expires, something like that, expires at the end of the month. So they're saying, oh no, we got to figure this out before then. Not to get it passed, but at least get a top line number in the outlines. That's what they're saying. The last piece that just emerged over the weekend is that, we already covered last week what the pared back proposal looks like. And it sucks, right? It already sucked. There's very little to like about it. The one thing that you can really hang your hat on is universal pre-K. That would be good. But even the child care provision with like massively raised costs for the middle class, they took the paid leave and they're like, instead of 12 weeks, how about 4? Well, now they're thinking of getting rid of the paid leave altogether. And then the other thing that progressives were kind of hanging their hat on was, all right, well, we still got the money for the Medicare expansion, so we'd get vision, hearing, and maybe dental. Well, now they're saying, we may not do any of that.
Right.
Apparently, the dental is the most expensive and the most complicated to implement. So there were already some questions over whether that would get put in. And now they're saying, well, we may just strip out the hearing and the vision as well. So what's left really is pretty pathetic. I mean, that's just the bottom line. It's pretty pathetic. We know the climate change provision, the central core of that was stripped out because Manchin was opposed to it. We know they ruled out the best ways of going after the ultra wealthy's tax dodges. We know community college, free community college, which Biden said was one of his top priorities. They stripped that out and they're like, we're going to give you some scholarships instead.
And it was killed by the college industry. I want people to understand that.
Yeah, that's really important. So, I mean, after corporate lobbyists and their paid apparatchiks like Heidi Heitkamp got their hands on this thing, it is a tattered mess if any of it even passes at all, which, as I said last week, if you are a progressive, you should be committed to making sure that in its present form, it does not pass because it is not worth it. No one will ever take you seriously again. All of your priorities have been gutted. And if you just roll over, I don't know what you're doing.
Well, unfortunately, that could be the reality.
Hey, so remember how we told you how awesome premium membership was? Well, here we are again to remind you that becoming a premium member means you don't have to listen to our constant pleas for you to subscribe. So what are you waiting for? Become a premium member today by going to breakingpoints.com, which you can click on in the show notes.
This is a really tragic story. And I know there's a lot of jokes. I was at a comedy show this weekend and there were a lot of jokes to be had. But in terms of the actual details, it is very, very sad. So Alec Baldwin, we know, the actor, he was on the set of a movie called Rust that they were filming down in New Mexico. Now, during the course of that filming, Alec Baldwin, what we know as of this morning, was pointing a gun at the camera. He was rehearsing a scene in which the actor points a gun directly at the camera. Now, during the course of pointing, and we don't know if he fired it, if he had trigger discipline, whatever, we have no idea. The gun unsurprisingly went off during the course of that, and it killed the director of cinematography, Halyna Hutchins, and wounded another member of the crew. Now, there's been a lot, and there should be now, scrutiny of what the hell was going on here.
Yeah.
And one of the key things that a lot of people are taking a look at is that the film set had previous accidental gun discharges. People on the crew expressed concerns, let's put this up from the New York Times, over gun mishaps and working conditions just days before the shooting. So there were at least 2 accidental gun discharges on that set days before that Alec Baldwin fatally shot this cinematographer. The discharges occurred on October 16th, so like 9 days ago, the former crew member said, prompting a complaint to a supervisor about the safety practices on the set right outside of Santa Fe. The crew members asked not to be named because of, their future employment in the industry, and I can't believe that they're afraid about being retaliated against after they complained about, gun discharges, which ended up killing somebody. But several workers quit just hours before the fatal shooting over complaints about unpaid work and working conditions on the production. Now, remember, this also comes during the midst of there ended up not being a strike, but IATSE, which represented many of the people who actually work in the film industry, they had been saying that given the backlog of production, they were working 12, 16-hour days, being treated like garbage, not even getting paid necessarily what they needed to by people with streaming and all of that. They renegotiated, I believe, some sort of interim deal, and that's what they're working towards. But this highlights the fact that on the movie industry sets themselves, working conditions have been very sparse. And whenever you have that and you make it really intense, then accidents can slip through the cracks. And clearly, this was just a confluence of a terrible series of events. Now, what we're really learning from most of this is from affidavits which are being filed in New Mexico in terms of search warrants. So let's put this up there. And again, this is what we know. According to the people who are on the set, and spoke under penalty of perjury to the sheriff's office there in Santa Fe. Alec Baldwin was told that the gun in the shooting was safe. Now, according to the affidavit, they shouted "cold gun," which is supposed to indicate that a gun does not have any live rounds in it. Now, when Baldwin fired the gun, what happened is that they did not know live rounds were inside the prop gun. But again, this also raises a lot of questions from people who I've spoken to who are gun safety experts and more, which is that if this is a gun which is firing blanks, now blanks have injured people in the past, but in general, guns that are used on set which can fire blanks are not supposed to be able to even fire live ammunition. So how did this gun get there in the first place? And the second thing is that armorers who work with movie productions, Crystal said, that there should never have even been a gun with live ammo there in the first place.
Right.
And you would presume also there were 3 guns that are apparently kept outside on a table, that the safety people were checking both the chamber and whether the gun had any ammo in it in the first place.
It's basic.
Yeah, there should be, series of checks going on here with the guns. Now, I don't know a lot about guns,
Especially-
but I've used it before.
Especially after you had 2 accidental discharges
Right, so
already.
what is happening?
So, right, and another red flag that they raised, because within the industry, the use of guns, the way you handle them, the safety protocols that you have to go through are very stringent. You all may recall back in the 90s, Brandon Lee was killed by, there was actually a live round that was stuck in the chamber.
That's right.
On the film set of The Crow. And I think especially after that, they really beefed up their protocol to make sure that guns would be handled safely when they're used in a filming production like this. And another red flag, this is from that New York Times piece, 6 experts in the use of firearms on film or television sets said it was very unusual and it was against protocol for an assistant director to hand the gun to an actor. And that's what they're saying happened, that the assistant producer handed the gun to Baldwin, said, cold gun. They say it should be the armorer who is on the set that should be handling the weapons and in charge of them from beginning to end. So even the fact that it was the assistant producer who handed the gun to Baldwin, they described as a red flag. But yeah, the fact that you had crew resigning, 6 crew members quitting on that day tells you that this thing was massively unfairly. A lot of the concerns that they raised are concerns that we heard about when IATSE was considering, when they authorized that strike as part of their contract negotiations, things like incredibly long days, and then they're not being booked hotel rooms. So they're having to drive after this long day, having to drive an hour back, I think, to Santa Fe. And so you're exhausted, you're falling asleep on the road, you're coming in tired. And guess what? When that is the case, horrific mistakes can ultimately happen. Horrific accidents can happen. So obviously we're still learning all the details here. One of the things that is complicated as well is that Baldwin is not only an actor, he's also a producer.
Yeah, and so he's involved in the management
Right.
and should have been aware of the safety issues. He claims that that's not the case.
Yeah, and look, I don't know enough about the film industry to know when you have a high-level actor like that, do you just get a producer credit, but you're not really involved in the, in the management.
I think it has something to do with money distribution too. But,
and of course, the producers do say that, listen, we take safety very seriously, and we didn't know about these issues, et cetera, et cetera. But clearly, there was a lot going on there, and it was a low-budget film, and ended in absolute disaster. It's really hard to fathom how this ultimately occurred. Like you said, how did a gun with a live round, like, why was that ever on the set at all? How would that happen? Because there's no scenario on a film set where you would have a real gun with a live round. So why was that ever there in the first place? It's just hard to wrap your head around.
Yeah, it really is. And, the other thing here is that the way they describe it is really unclear, which is that Alec Baldwin, again, this is per the New York Times, and in terms of what they're saying happened, was pointing the gun at the camera. Now, it doesn't say that he pulled the trigger, right? It just says, rehearsing a scene, pointing a revolver toward the camera lens when the gun suddenly went off. Now, again, it could be, look, the most likely scenario is he did pull the trigger.
That he pulled the trigger,
But
yeah.
it also doesn't say that that's necessarily the case. And, things have happened. It's possible, like you said previously, it could be that there could have been, live ammo that was like lodged inside the gun. But really what we're learning is with the people who walked off the set, 6 people who walked off the set,
Yeah.
2 accidental gun discharges already, the chain of custody of the gun itself should have been handed by the armorer instead of the assistant director. There clearly was something going on the set. And in terms of who's really responsible for what happened here, it seems to be that whoever was in charge of checking those guns and the safety protocols and more are ultimately the people responsible, which led to this terrible tragedy.
Yeah.
And that's just the case here.
One last chilling detail is that the movie is actually about an accidental killing, which is just, another horrible and like I said, chilling detail. And with The Crow, when Brandon Lee was killed, that movie is also about a death and someone who's murdered then rises from the dead. So very, very weird and horrible circumstances. In terms of, there's obviously an ongoing investigation. So far, no charges filed. But that's not definitive. You could imagine if there was some sort of reckless criminal negligence, you could imagine potentially a manslaughter charge. But we're a long way from that, and the investigation is ongoing. Of course, Alec Baldwin and everyone else says that they are cooperating with the authorities. So we'll keep you updated there.
There you go.
Another story we've been following closely: corruption in general and corruption at the Fed in particular. So there were 3 individuals who, during a time, during the coronavirus pandemic, when the Fed was extraordinarily active, extraordinarily involved in what ultimately asset prices ended up being for any number of things, you had 3 members that were making big moves in their own stock portfolio. 2 Fed presidents ended up resigning over those trades. You had a guy named Kaplan, another one named Rosengren. Rosengren says he resigned for health reasons, but both traded stocks. Kaplan in millions of dollars in individual stocks. Rosengren traded in real estate-tied securities while he was warning about problems in that market. So they both resigned. Then you had the Fed's vice chair, Richard Clarida, who said he was rebalancing his profile. He shifted between $1 million and $5 million from a broad-based bond fund into a broad-based stock fund. And then lo and behold, the stock market went way up, which was very surprising because, we're in the middle of this total economic collapse. But anyway, so this has led to a lot of, we'll just put it nicely, questions about whether individuals associated with the Fed in very important positions of power were using insider knowledge for their own personal profit. Jerome Powell had come under a lot of fire for this incredible, at least appearance of corruption. And so now we actually have some movement here. They've announced some new rules for the Fed about what they can do, what type of stocks and bonds they can own. Let's go ahead and throw this tear sheet up on the screen. So the Federal Reserve announced Thursday a wide-ranging ban on officials owning individual stocks and bonds and limits on other activities as well. That includes top policymakers, those who sit on the Fed Open Market Committee, along with senior staff. Future investments will have to be confined to diversified assets such as mutual funds, so very sort of like broad-based, boring funds. Under the new rules, officials will have to provide 45 days notice in advance of buying or selling any securities, even those ones that are still allowed. They're going to be required to hold the securities for at least a year, and they can't buy or sell funds during, quote, heightened financial market stress. They also are any current holdings they have are going to have to be divested, though no timetable has been announced. So those are the details here. So they're actually pretty stringent.
This is a great policy. I 100% support
They're
this.
actually pretty stringent. They're going to have to get rid of what they have. There are going to be incredible disclosure rules about, very limited what you're going to be able to hold at all. And you're going to have to hold it for at least a year. There are going to be lockdown periods where you can't do anything with it. I mean, the obvious thing to say is, number one, what took you so long?
Yeah.
And number two, when is Congress going to do the same damn thing?
I was going to say, okay, let's go. Let's do the whole government. I know there are some regulations in terms of federal appointees, but the president, the vice president, and Congress, they are all completely exempted from this rule. Remember, before the Stocks Act, they could do whatever they wanted. Now they just have to tell us what they do a couple of months later, and they don't even have to really tell us exactly what's going on there. Now, what I have noticed is that, what I'm really heartened by, is there seems to be a growing pop culture awareness of how much the system is rigged. And when I saw this by Dave Portnoy, it was particularly important because I know he has a lot of connections to the retail traders, Robinhood, all that. He's a pretty famous guy. And what you can see there, he said, quote, if you are an elected official, you and spouse and children shouldn't be allowed to own individual stocks, period. He adds, you also shouldn't be able to profit off your position during or after. No books, paid speaking gigs. We truly see who wants to help and who wants to use political office for personal gain.
Here.
Yeah, 100% right behind you, Dave. And I put that together with this story, which really disturbed me, even though I do think it is funny, from NPR. We brought it to you a couple of weeks ago. Let's put it up there on the screen, which is that there were TikTokers who are trading stocks just by copying what members of Congress do. And so what they're like, look, system's rigged. Shout out to Nancy Pelosi. He's like, we'll just do exactly what Nancy Pelosi is doing. She appears psychic. She's the queen of investing. And apparently they've actually been doing quite well, a lot of these TikTokers. But again, here you have two pieces of pop culture phenomena where there is an awareness that it is BS that people who are on the Federal Open Markets Committee, who literally drive markets and assets, the people who are able to buy and trade stocks, and even worse, are the people who are literally making the laws. I mean, if you are the Speaker of the House and you actually know which way, one way or the other, like elder care or something is going, you think maybe, you wouldn't want to buy some nursing home, stock or some stock in some health. There's a myriad different ways in which policy affects the way markets. Even the fact that they would not do a billionaire tax, let's say if you knew that an hour before and you sold stock even on the general like S&P 500, you could make a killing.
Yeah.
And these are endless, in terms of the conflicts of interest, because we focus a lot on the speaker, and we should, but look, every congressman has access to non-public information.
Mm-hmm.
They all sit on committees. If you sit on ag, you could, buy or sell ag stock. Defense, I mean, who knows, in terms of the contractors, in terms of all of that, whether a bill is even going to pass or not, or even a delay in funding is worth hundreds of billions of dollars on the open stock market. So it is just extraordinarily clear that the Fed rules should go into place for the entire elected, all elected officials. That's the bare minimum. That's where we should start in terms of stamping out the appearance of corruption. But we know Congress will never actually do it to itself.
Yes,
so,
very, very true. This has been so successful that they say in that NPR piece, at least one financial services consultant is planning to set up a financial instrument that automatically tracks congressional stock picks.
Like an ETF or something. That's
because in his view, lawmakers are probably privy to more information than just the general public. We know, because Unusual Whales has run the data, that they are in fact outpacing the market.
Significantly.
They're, some of the most brilliant traders, I guess, in the country, right here in Congress.
Yeah, wow.
Incredible minds. And the other thing that's interesting, though, is, so you've got the corruption piece, but also because people just assume it's corrupt, there's some analysis to suggest that they actually move markets with their picks.
Oh, I bet. Yes.
Because,
it's like the assumption of corruption. Right.
TikTokers aren't the only ones who are looking and saying, oh, what's Pelosi and her husband doing?
Mm-hmm.
I have a feeling those are probably going to end up working out pretty well. So it distorts the whole thing. But of course, the biggest problem is the corruption. And so it is, in one sense, it is heartening to see the pop culture understanding of this. In another sense, it's really dark.
No, it's sad.
It's really dark that people just assume, and obviously I'm with them, that these trades are being made based on inside info. There's just an assumption that every aspect of our government is completely and thoroughly corrupt to the point that people are making significant financial decisions banking on the corruption of that system.
Yeah, no, that's
and that really kind of tells you where we are right now.
Yeah, and I think that's the problem, which is that when it becomes such an open secret, and whenever it becomes, a direct knowledge, and people are like, okay, well, if it's just rigged, then I'm just going to follow the rigging. That's when you start to really have people who lose faith in, the sanctity of government, the information people are being told, what exactly is going on. I applaud the Fed for actually doing this. It probably should not have taken that long, but we need to put this in place for everybody in government. And it actually could have a pretty significant impact.
Absolutely. And I mean, my God, these people are rich already.
Yeah, most of these people are millionaires anyway.
Nancy Pelosi is extraordinarily wealthy.
I think she's like a third or fourth richest member of Congress. So.
She says she has nothing to do with the stock pick. It's all her husband, and she doesn't tell him anything. That's her defense. But listen, you look at the overall numbers, you see them outperforming the market, and you know what's going on. I mean, it doesn't take a genius to figure this out. So it's disgusting. And I honestly think it is one of the most corrosive aspects of Washington, D.C., the way that they just out and out seek every possible way to profit off of their positions of quote-unquote service, and not just the stock trading, but also the cashing in after the fact. I mean, just look at what Kyrsten Sinema's doing right now.
Yes.
Look, I can't get inside her head and know 100% what she's thinking and why she's positioning herself the way she is. All I know is that she ran on lowering prescription drug prices, and then Pharma threw her a bunch of cash, and now she's on the other side of that issue. That's what I know. All I know is that people in her own state overwhelmingly support provisions that she's now wildly opposed to. And it certainly seems like she has her eye not just on campaign cash in the present day, but on what she may cash in and do after the fact. And I am 100% certain that she is not the only one. This also, by the way, applies not just to elected officials, but you see the revolving door with these agencies and agency heads and prominently placed people who they walk right out from the regulatory agency into the industry that they were supposed to be regulating. Sometimes it goes back the other way, too, where you'll place people from the industry in those agencies so that they've got an in, so that they can get rules written that are favorable to them. I mean, it is incredibly destructive to our society and to just an underlying faith that anyone is out for the public good rather than out for their own payday. And so kudos to the Fed. Got to give them credit for putting in what look like some pretty stringent rules. We'll certainly be on the lookout for if there are any big loopholes that they left in for them to exploit.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, let's move on. Our fun segment. I know it's not the most important story in the world, but there is a lot of interest. But when you dig down to it, there still remains a lot to be said around the fracas between Joe Rogan and CNN. Of course, for those who are I know it's a great word. For those who are just catching up in terms of what all this means, so Joe Rogan obviously got sick, had COVID, took a variety of medicines. One of them was ivermectin. CNN consistently said that he was taking horse dewormer. Rogan then has CNN's Sanjay Gupta on. Sanjay Gupta says that they should not have said that. Then Don Lemon brings Sanjay Gupta on his air and publicly flogs him and says, no, actually we did absolutely nothing wrong. Rogan responds, now we are at the point where CNN is issuing another statement in which they say they have done absolutely nothing wrong. Their statement is so clownish and dumb that the Washington Post is calling them out for it. So let's put this on the screen. Here's what CNN has said in its latest defense of its coverage. Quote, The heart of this debate has been purposely confused and ultimately lost. It's never been about livestock versus human dosage of ivermectin. The issue is that a powerful voice in media, who by example and through his platform, sowed doubt in the proven and approved science of vaccines while promoting the use of an unproven treatment for COVID-19, a drug development to ward off parasites in farm animals. The only thing CNN did wrong here was bruise the ego of a popular podcaster who pushed dangerous conspiracy theories and risked the lives of millions of people in doing so. So this is important. After CNN Sanjay Gupta said they should not have said that network, in which he is the chief medical advisor and chief medical person, this scientist, in-house extraordinaire, has said openly, we should not have said that.
We got it wrong.
The network has now put out a statement saying, not only did we do nothing wrong, that Joe Rogan is full of it, and we stand by our original comments 100%. And they point to a number of their transcripts where they characterized it, and they say they did it completely fine. There is a pattern here in terms of how CNN operates. They make an open and blatant mistake. Everybody knows it. Not even a mistake. They make an open and blatant, propagandistic effort. Then everybody knows what they did was wrong. Their own person says what they did was wrong. And then after it gets turned up, they say, no, we didn't do anything wrong. We stand by it 100%. And what I love here is that even the Washington Post's Eric Wemple, who is by no means a conservative or whatever, here's what he says. CNN's statement sounds more like the work of an advocacy group than a journalism outfit. The issue actually begins and ends with the integrity of CNN's content.
Yes.
If we take Rogan's prescription claim at face value, and CNN has not challenged it, then the network's coverage was slanted in some cases and straight up incorrect in others. So in this instance, you don't have to endorse Rogan to abhor CNN's coverage of the topic. Here's a network, after all, that prides itself on impeccable, factual hygiene, a place where there's no conceptual hair too fine to split, no political statement too sprawling to fly speck. Fly speck, great word, I'm gonna steal it. It's tough living by your own standards. If CNN wants to describe ivermectin in a way that doesn't slime the people who take it, The Guardian provides a fine template. A drug used against parasites in humans and livestock. Thank you. That's all they ever had to say.
Even that, I take a little bit of issue with.
Right.
Because, lots of drugs that humans consume
are dual use, yeah.
Also have a veterinarian use. My dog was just prescribed Valium after she had a surgery.
Okay.
Are you going to describe Valium as a drug that humans use, but also dogs?
My dog's heartworm medicine is actually ivermectin.
Yeah. So, even that, but yes, Wemple does, obviously, he sorts through these issues in a much more clear-headed way than CNN ultimately does. Because what is he getting at here, ultimately? Joe Rogan is a podcaster, okay? He is a very popular podcast host. Y'all are pretending to be straight, fact-based journalists.
Yep.
You are holding Joe Rogan to a much higher standard than you are holding yourselves.
Yes.
You are expecting absolutely no accountability and accuracy and sticking to the facts with your own journalists. And what Wemple does is he went through any number of instances, everybody from Anderson Cooper saying that ivermectin is more often used to deworm horses, Don Lemon, of course, saying that Rogan is taking a drug meant for deworming livestock. Bakari Sellers, who's a commentator, saying something similar. Jim Acosta. Time after time after time, they frame it in the same incorrect way.
Yep.
And let me say again, at best, ivermectin is unproven to treat COVID. At worst, it doesn't work at all. And of course, there are people who, because there's a shortage of ivermectin, have been buying it from the livestock store. That is really dangerous, and you should not do that. That is not what Joe Rogan did. And if you aren't saying that, then you are lying. It is really that simple. It's not a hard one to figure out. The fact that they were so unequivocal and so feisty,
that's what gets me,
in their statement is really something. And if you're Sanjay Gupta, what's he saying about this?
They just screwed. They basically just had to say, hey, Sanjay, screw you.
Yeah.
What you spoke out of turn, smack him on the head.
Completely cut him off at the knees.
Right.
Demanded he come on and, have his little, you called it a struggle session with Don Lemon. Then put out this statement saying, no. What our chief medical correspondent, the guy who we look to
provide medical advice.
To provide medical advice, that guy's wrong.
Yeah.
Listen to us in our PR department. That's really something.
Oh, it's stunning. And again, why are we even covering this? And there's a lot of discussion around, this is just media beef. It's actually not, because Joe got to the very core of it whenever he was talking with Sanjay. He was like, do you understand how when you lie about, what he called some shithead comedian and some medicine that he takes, that people aren't going to say, hey, I don't trust your reporting now on Syria, or I don't trust your reporting now on Hunter Biden. And you shouldn't actually on either of those subjects. But it's a good point as to whenever you see them lie about something, then defend the lie, and now go through this whole public process of it and continue to stick by it. How can you have confidence in the other facts that they are telling you? I'm about to cover the lab leak in my monologue, but CNN's Brianna Keeler, who is now their in-house cringe bot, recently put out a whole thread on why she wasn't wrong whenever she made fun of Rand Paul, because she's like, scientists should face questions, but Rand Paul is not the person to ask those questions. I'm like, yeah, you're right, you are. And yet, how many times has Fauci been on your network or even on your show? Have you ever asked him one question about gain-of-function research? Will you ever ask him one question about gain-of-function research? We all know that she never will. So it's just a complete farce in terms of the way that they conduct themselves and the stuff that they say that they'll try to get to the bottom of. That CNN Bernie thing that we covered this weekend, that's the same thing. It's over and over again, right? It's like they can do absolutely no wrong. It's actually the job, it's the fault of everybody else involved. Screw you. Actually, we're
perfect.
We're absolutely perfect. And also, our declining ratings have nothing to do with it.
Her tweet to Bernie Sanders.
Right.
It's blame the media o'clock and Bernie Sanders is right on time. And then, of course, when you actually go through the data, Bernie was 100% correct and they were 100% incorrect, just as they are in this instance. You might be noticing a consistent pattern here.
Right. In-house cringe bot. Let's get that trending. Wow, you guys must really like listening to our voices. Well, I know this is annoying. Instead of making you listen to a Viagra commercial, when you're done, check out the other podcast I do with Marshall Kosloff called The Realignment. We talk a lot about the deeper issues that are changing, realigning in American society. You always need more Crystal and Saga in your daily lives. Take care, guys.
All right, Saga, what are you looking at?
We've been talking about the Iraq War a lot here on the show lately, not just to relive the horror, but to remind you of how the media, the intelligence community, the government, all elite networks of power, tasked with protecting us and informing us, actually sold us out instead for a terrible war. Now, most importantly, we discuss it because the mechanisms through which that war were sold keep repeating in our elite culture again and again and again. The worst part is not that it was an accident, but that it appears now by design. That the media and the people in power latch on to the stories of near complete fantasy and use their relative monopoly on cultural power in America to gaslight tens of millions of people from the truth. We saw Iraq WMD level screw-ups in Russiagate. I didn't think I'd be lucky enough to see 2 of those in my lifetime, now let alone 3. Because it only took 2 years after Russiagate for the next one to arrive, and that is the lab leak hypothesis. In many ways, the lab leak developments are worse than Iraq on a purely media failure level. At least 2 years after the Iraq War, even the most warmongering journalists had to admit Saddam did not have weapons of mass destruction. 2 years into Russiagate, the Mueller report came out, and we knew all of what was what. But right now, it's been over 2 years since the Wuhan Institute of Virology took its database of samples offline, indicating a possible accident. It is actually almost 2 years to the day, right now, since the first likely coronavirus cases began spreading from the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and today, the public and the media still will not accept their failure. Perhaps unlike Iraq WMD, in this case, the media literally needs this to be true. That the lab leak hypothesis didn't happen because they would have validated a single thing that Donald Trump once said. And in their stupidity, they elevated Dr. Anthony Fauci to prominence. Fauci and his connections to the Wuhan lab at this point are very well known. He worked for nearly 2 years to cover up his complicity in funding gain-of-function research at that facility. He has done so much with such absolute impunity now to this day because he knows that the mainstream media and the Dems will give him a free pass. There was no better evidence of that than one of his most recent trips to Capitol Hill, where he was confronted directly by Senator Rand Paul, who sneered back at him and told him a lie. Let's relive that for those who might have missed it.
Dr. Fauci, knowing that it is a crime to lie to Congress, do you wish to retract your statement of May 11th where you claimed that the NIH never funded gain-of-function research in Wuhan?
Senator Paul, I have never lied before the Congress, and I do not retract that statement. This paper that you are referring to was judged by qualified staff up and down the chain